What's going on, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be telling you why Hitler's the third worst person in history and not the worst person in history. So, why do so many people believe that Hitler was the worst? Well, I'll tell you. It's easier. And in the US, where we have a left leaning academia, we have a left leaning control on academics and on education, it's easier to point to the other side of the aisle and say that this guy is the worst in history. And it has a lot to do with ideologies right now in the education system, where people are pushing for socialism and socialist ideologies that eventually lead to communism, which, as we could see, the two people worse than Hitler are both communists. Anyway, this is not to say that you know it's a problem that academia is left leaning, but it is a problem when you refuse to acknowledge the other two people objectively worse than Hitler. Firstly, let's look at Hitler's stats. All right, 11 to 12 million deaths. This includes the Holocaust with 6 million Jews and the Gypsies and all these other demographics that were persecuted. He has a horrible war strategist that led to 4.5 million soldiers' deaths, and he did not let his generals make the right choices, and he thought that whatever he said was the best plan, and it just objectively was not. Another thing that's horrible about him is he was a vegetarian. Uh, he's also a genocidal maniac, but we'll get to what's worse than this. Okay, so that's pretty bad. Joseph Stalin artificially famined Ukraine. Everybody knows that. If you don't, you can look it up. It's very, very ugly, a very ugly part of history. Yeah, Hitler was democratically elected, whereas Stalin murdered and through corruption was able to become the leader of what was the Soviet Union at the time. So that already makes him worse than Hitler, just as far as coming into power goes. And then by proxy and legislation, killed 30 million civilians. So that's pretty bad. His legislation, where crops and everything would go to the government and then be redistributed, led to the starvation of 30 million people. About some numbers put it higher, numbers put it lower. He murdered his wife after a dinner argument. Now you may be thinking, well, Hitler's wife died. Yeah, but Hitler's wife killed herself. So she wasn't murdered by Hitler, which also makes Stalin worse than Hitler. And as far as spousal uh, engagements go. Putting up the Iron Curtain, which led to a lot more starvation, cutting ties with a growing world, also led to the West's power over basically the economy in the world and everything. That's why the West was so powerful. And the Katyn massacre, which killed 25,000 Polish prisoners of war. Hitler didn't really kill prisoners of war as bad as Stalin did. So in total, you have about 60 million deaths, including war casualties, 40,000 people per week, which comes out to about 5.7 thousand per day. Mao Zedong, this terrible piece of shit, starved 45 million citizens through basically the same legislation that Stalin did, because they were both communists. Tortured 2.5 million civilians out of those 45 million. So if you weren't starved, you were tortured and persecuted by your own government. His one-child policy led to the death of over 100 million infant girls. Now you may be asking why. Well, in order to to control the raging population growth in China, he instated that every family could only have a maximum of one child. And because the son would typically carry the last name, it led to, if you had a girl, you probably killed that girl so that you could have another shot at having a son, which led to the death of 100 million infant girls. So his number is just way high. This is the worst person in history. Like, something as little as stealing rice would be punished by burying the person alive. Like, dude, as far as evil goes, this man is the most evil person to have ever touched Earth. His total death count equals out to about 145 million or 67,000 per week, or almost 10,000 per day. And this is average estimates. There's higher numbers in this and there's lower numbers in this. And I have a dishonorable mention. Pol Pot. I wouldn't say he's worse than Hitler, but I'd say he's pretty close because 5 of every 6 adults were killed under his Cambodian genocide. He was also a child killer. He'd order people to bash the heads of children against trees to kill them. Um, so I put him at number 4, Hitler being at number 3. So that concludes that. Those are the people who are worse than Hitler.